Welcome back everyone. Let's go ahead and take a look at another Nintendo console in 2022, and this specific console is the Nintendo 2DS. Personally, I truly do think this is probably one of the best consoles Nintendo has made that was so funny and so goofy when it first came out, but it honestly kind of, dragged on to becoming an actual console, and it was actually one of the only consoles Nintendo still sold from the 3DS lineup. Now, I think saying it's one of the best consoles Nintendo's ever made is kind of an overstatement, but this kind of generated the 2DS XL, and I would consider that one probably one of the best 3DS lineup devices that they made. So although this one, I wouldn't put it above the 3DS, because of this we got the 2DS XL, and I really do love that console for sure. Now you can't really buy these things in the brand new market anymore, mostly because they got, discontinued in 2020. But if you still want to pick it up, I'm sure there's places in the used market where you can actually go buy these things. So that may be another thing you may want to look at. And I may leave some, from Amazon link down in the description. Now, starting off with the outside of these things, this thing actually ended up, when it first kind of came out in 2016, this was kind of a funny idea. I think a lot of people looked at this console and they were like, Nintendo will never make a console like this. And personally, I was kind of in the same boat. It really didn't make too much sense. But after thinking about it, it kind of makes a lot of sense for sure. And the biggest reason for this is because something like the 2DS, it won't really cannibalize a lot of the sales of the 3DS. And I can honestly see a lot of people owning a 2DS and a 3DS, almost kind of the same thing as a Nintendo Switch Lite and the Nintendo Switch. Most people will probably not own either one, but if you own a Switch Lite, there are a ton of reasons to go up to a Nintendo Switch. But if you have a Nintendo Switch, there really isn't any reason to go to the Switch Lite, and that's exactly what Nintendo wants. They want people to go and buy the, more expensive one, but if they can't, they still want, people to go ahead and, get these hands on their consoles, and that's why they make these budget tier, kind of consoles like this one. If you own a Nintendo 2DS, there are a lot of reasons to go up to a 3DS. If you own a 3DS, there's practically no reason to go to a 2DS, at all, except for the 2DS XL in my opinion. Now this thing on the front, it didn't fold, it was a little bulky, and it kind of reminded me of like half a Nintendo Switch. It was like a Nintendo Switch but like half the size. It was almost like this square design with rounded corners up top, and although it looks very goofy, I kind of do think it was a smart ploy from, Nintendo, because it just kind of made people look at this thing. It brought a lot of market share and a lot of people interested in this thing, but I've heard of a lot of people who actually prefer this type of design over the Nintendo 3DS. This thing did not have the 3D toggle, and this thing, I think the battery life was really good on this console too, which was really cool. But again, it was kind of bringing that Game Boy type of design to this type of console. Now it did not fold like I mentioned, but you still had a front camera and a back camera on this thing, which was cool. And this thing was supposed to be cheap. It wasn't supposed to be a flagship console. It was supposed to be an alternative to the 3DS if you couldn't afford that, or if you prefer this type of design. Now you still had pretty much the same exact features as the 3DS for the most part. You had the joystick on the side, you had the, the arrow keys, you had the, standard buttons. There really wasn't anything super spectacular about this console, but the fact that it was actually a cheaper alternative is something that Nintendo has kind of done for quite a bit of time, but it's a really smart thing that they did this. They had the Nintendo Wii Mini, they had the Nintendo Wii U at its life, probably at the end of life, probably when they were making this console, but a year after this console came out, we had the Nintendo Switch, and that's when things really changed for this specific console. But I personally do think that a console like this still holds up very, very well. When it first came out, it came out and retailed for $79.99, so around $80 this thing came out for. And when you think about it like that, this thing wasn't competing with the 3DS. It was really in its own league, and there wasn't really too many competitors in this specific time frame. Now, as of September 30th, 2018, this thing sold 9.68 million units. I'm sure this number has gone up to maybe like 13 or 15 million units at that point or something like that, maybe twice as much, I don't know. But the fact that this thing sold millions of units is so crazy to me, because I just can't see too many people playing this specific, console. I haven't seen anybody play this console in public, to be honest, but I've seen a lot of people play 3DS, 3DS XLs, and the Nintendo Switches as well. So the legacy is still there. Again, Nintendo just wants you to buy their games. They will probably give their consoles away for free if you will just buy their games, to be honest. Now, the screen up top was 3.53 inches, the screen at the bottom was 3.02 inches, so keeping with that same aspect ratio as the Nintendo 3DS, this means that you can play not only all the 3DS games out there, but all the standard Nintendo DS games as well. And as I mentioned before, this is a massive thing and a massive feature for the Nintendo 2DS. The fact that you can actually go ahead and buy this console and play a humongous library of games is so cool. And that's something that I mentioned time and time again. I love having a console like the Nintendo 2DS or any of the 3DS lineup of, consoles, because there is such a huge library of games that you can play. And personally, that is one of my favorite things about owning these types of consoles. When you have something like the, Nintendo 2DS, although it isn't quite as, maybe as feature full as the Nintendo Switch, again, having that type of capability for the Nintendo 3DS, I think is really cool. And personally, I think that's a really cool thing that this specific console had. Now, it's going to be turning 10 years old next year. So the fact that this console is 9 years old right now is super insane to me, because it really didn't age super gracefully, if I'm being honest. It really doesn't look like the most, beautiful console of all time. But I think, again, that's kind of what Nintendo was going for. They wanted people to go ahead and pick up the more expensive Nintendo 3DS. They wanted more people to go and pick up that console because it costs more money and it could probably do more. And since the Nintendo Wii U wasn't selling too well, the 3DS lineup actually was doing fairly well, compared to the Nintendo Wii U lineup. So Nintendo, again, as smart as they could, they went ahead and pretty much doubled down on the 3DS lineup. They made a ton of games for this lineup. They brought the Super Mario Maker. They brought Smash for the 3DS. They brought a lot of different games for this console, and arguably one of the best, Animal Crossings, came out for the Nintendo 3DS, which also can be played on the 2DS as well, let alone all the Nintendo DS games that you can play this console, and all of probably the mods that you can do on this console as well. Now, I don't think you can mod a 2DS, I could be totally wrong. I was able to modify my 3DS XL and my 3DS, and those consoles, I'm going to tell you right now, they are crazy. What you can do on a modded 3DS or a 3DS XL is super crazy, and I'm so happy you can actually do that. But with a 2DS, I'm not too sure if you can do the same exact thing, but still totally okay if you can't. This console, in my opinion, I think is still completely worth it in 2022, but especially as a collector's item. For some reason, these 2DSs, they're so funny to look at, and and a lot of people still want to get their hands on it, which I think is totally okay, and it makes a total lot of sense to me. Although it's not the most premium console Nintendo's ever made, I think seeing something like a Nintendo 2DS in this day and age is very interesting because, first of all, you kind of need it to kind of, finish up your lineup. If you're a collector, you will probably need to buy a Nintendo 2DS at some point to finish up your lineup. But this thing for $80, when it first came out, these things are still selling for around $100 right now. So the fact that these things haven't gone down in value, they've actually kind of started getting up, is actually really interesting. I'm seeing some on eBay right now. Some are for $90, some are for maybe $100, maybe like $80 here and there. But these are years after they've been able to play with it. And even some of these Nintendo 2DS XLs, which I will talk about in a different video, and these things have gone up like crazy in the used market too, which is so insane. So personally, what I would recommend you to do is 100%, if you own a 2DS or if you want to buy one, I would 100% recommend going for it. I mean, this is a solid console. But if you can, I would probably recommend going up to a 2DS XL. Those things definitely will have a lot more power. And I think the portability of it, being able to go and fold it and kind of going down that direction, will probably make a lot more sense to a lot more people. I think the 2DS is in a good spot, but like I mentioned, going up to something like a 2DS XL or a 3DS XL will definitely be better consoles. But I think this is still a very funny looking console, but I think it's very interesting, and I think it definitely has its spot in the whole entire Nintendo lineup, in my opinion. So that kind of covers it up there for the most part. If you have any other thoughts or questions, let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.